Season 11 is finally here, and with it, a lot of buffs and nerfs to many of your favorite characters, or maybe least favorite, if we're being honest. And with the mid-season patch before in 10.5, we also got to see many meta changes that took a while to settle. So we're going to talk about the biggest winners for Season 11, characters you should look out for, characters you should main, and many tips and tricks along the way. But do me a huge solid and press that subscribe button. We finally got to 80,000 subscribers, but it still says only 20% of you are subscribed. So if you haven't subscribed, please press that subscribe button and let's get into the video. Now, the first character is a character that has actually been slept on for quite some time. Fara is actually a huge winner in Season 11, and actually this character has been pretty good for quite some time. Incredibly powerful at poking out and spamming enemies, consistently triggering that DPS passive, applying a ton of pressure, which makes it much harder for the enemy supports to focus on anything besides healing, and you can duel a lot of the roster. I think really the problem with Fara at the beginning is many players didn't quite master this character fast enough. They didn't really know what was possible with this character. Fara is really good against a lot of characters that you think she wouldn't be. She's not bad against hit scan. She can really body most tanks on the roster, and consistently you can get a lot of value as long as you make sure to play cover, pick your battles, and save utility for when you want to all in people and take aggressive duels. Now, I did make a really in-depth Fara guide that you can check out if you want to know how to master this character, but let me give you one tip that you could use in this meta. Try to make sure if you're leaving cover, you have one form of utility, either your jump jets or your ability to concuss yourself, and keep in mind that you should never be playing in the open or an open space unless you far outrange the effective range of the enemy. So if you're going up against characters that just can't deal damage to you if you're really far away, you can take the skybox, you can spam from really far away, and you don't have to be worried about dying. But against any hit scan counters, characters that can deal damage to you while you're floating midair, you're gonna really want to be disciplined around leaving one cover to the next. Make sure that if you ever do, you have a utility piece that can propel you to cover at a moment's notice, and you're not just floating in no man's land and you're just going to get killed. The next character that we got to talk about, a winner of Season 11 and a consistent winner overall over the past like 3, 4, 5 seasons, is Bap. Bap is one of the best ranked characters to possibly play as a support, just that you could play. And I really would suggest you picking up this character in Season 11 because he's a character that doesn't have that many core weaknesses, and he gets a lot of automatic or intrinsic value. As in, the floor for his value is really high, but his ceiling, the max carry potential, is also really high. So at worst, you're never going to throw a game, and at best, you're going to carry a game on your back. And there's a lot of reasons for this. The first stage is that his base utility is just really strong. It's really powerful, from lamp to the ability to heal himself and people around him, to mobility that allows him to take the high ground and drop to the low ground. All of these things are really difficult to play around from anyone that wants to shut down Baptiste. If they're trying to combat you, you can change your high ground to low ground to high ground really easily with those exo boots. They have to deal with your immortality field and deal with you, which is going to cost them utility. You can force a heal on yourself at a moment's notice, and if they don't actually consistently do damage to you in the fight, you are going to get that passive heal. That's going to kick in, and then you're going to get your cooldowns back, and it just feels very difficult. It's like a mountain that you have to climb, but if you don't climb it fast enough, you get pushed down the mountain. That's how it feels as a DPS or even a tank trying to address or fight BAP, and it can be really frustrating. And then the other layer to that is that BAP just does a lot of damage. Like, he's not going to be just trying to ignore you the entire time. He's going to be dealing damage to you. He's going to be able to kill you. He can win the majority of 1v1s with any squishy, and if you ignore him, he has crazy high burst, and he's still going to interact with any duel that you take on the map. So BAP is a very hard character to deal with directly, and he's a very hard character to ignore. You combine both those elements together, and BAP is just an amazing character to pick right now. But if I were to give you one tip, here's the one tip I would give you on this character. I think consistently people are still messing up his ultimate amplification matrix, and really the best way to use this ultimate the majority of the time is to use this for tempo. And what I mean by tempo is the overall pace of play in a team fight as far as advantage or disadvantage, right? If your team has a slight advantage, you got one pick, or the enemy team are low resources, doing something like popping an amp matrix and dealing damage or healing someone to full out of nowhere that would take much longer to get to full, that is a way to add tempo and make it so that the enemy team is going to get overwhelmed, right? They're low, they're weak, maybe they did a lot of damage to your team, team, you did a lot of damage to their team, and both of y'all are playing a little slow, doing something like that can instantly give your team the go-ahead to take the fight to the enemy before they're ready to do so. And you basically press on the gas, you knock someone out when they're, you know, stumbling, you're making sure to close the fight, right? But on a flip side, Ant Matrix can be a great way to reverse a tempo. Enemy teams are committing really hard to something, they're pushing in, they think they have an advantage, and then the Ant Matrix allows you to kill someone, turn the tables, heal someone up to full, and this is a way to flip that tempo. So try to look for ways to either close the door on a fight or maybe potentially flip a fight, but keep in mind that it's not going to turn a fight where you're losing it by like 3 people and win that fight. You're going to waste your ultimate. And it's not going to be something that is going to be able to close the door on a fight when everyone's full. It's oftentimes better to be used just as a little bit more kick that you're adding towards a positive tempo or a reverse tempo. But the next character that we got to talk about as a winner in Season 11 is actually Malga. And Malga has been coming onto his own as a dominant force in the meta for quite some time. And he's just really good at playing the neutral. And what I mean by that is if he can just stand there and exist on objectives and points, he gets a lot of value just by existing. And there's a lot of characters that you have to constantly be doing something to get value, right? If you're Doomfist, you constantly have to be generating cycles, going for picks, going for giant amounts of CC. This is how you get your value. And there's other characters that do it through poke, and there's other characters that do it through dive. But in a lot of game modes, especially with how 5v5 is playing out, you really just want a tank that can stand there safely, take space, play cover, of course, but exist and get value. And Malga's one of the best characters at doing that. He consistently is going to be able to heal himself up. He's consistently applying a ton of pressure to the enemy team, and he has the means to close in a fight once that parity breaks. So he plays a really good neutral, and this is what we call no tempo or zero tempo, or just the idea that no team has an advantage, right? Everyone's just sitting there, everyone's just poking and trading resources. Malga plays in that environment really good. He's not going to feed. He's not going to go for a giant play and die. He's not going to get countered, whatever, right? He gets to exist. But the second his team has an advantage, he can turn the tables. He can charge in. He can create these closed fights and basically has the means to quote-unquote dive in to close a fight out once you have an advantage so that the enemy team don't get their legs back, don't get that second wind. But at the same time, he doesn't have to always dive to get value. He can just stand in the neutral, and that's super strong. Really underrated of a character aspect, and Malga's one of the best at doing it. So as such, he's one of the best winners in Season 11 and has been for quite some time. Now, if I were to give you one tip for Malga, I would just say try not to be overly greedy with your cage fight. Like, yeah, I know it's cool to try to maybe do a wombo combo, maybe try to kill the entire enemy team, but most of the time, you generate one pick, one source of value, one trapped tracer, and you're going to win the game off of that. So don't always try to go for this grand slam ult. Just try to get consistent value, and you're going to win a lot of these neutral games, and you're just going to win free team fights a lot of the time. Really strong ultimate. The next character on the list, number 4, is actually Widowmaker. And Widowmaker has been slowly creeping up in her power level and her pressure due to how a lot of team fights are happening, especially with team fights happening a lot slower. Sometimes there's a lot of poking phases in team fights that Widowmaker gets to really create openings for your team in a way that other characters just can't. That giant amount of burst damage is incredible. Being able to keep DPS in check on the off angles is also super strong. And yes, I know Widowmaker is not gonna be that playable unless you have the mechanical skill to back her, but once you do, this character is a must answer threat, especially on a lot of different maps, and can really punish a lot of players that don't play proper natural cover, that don't play characters that can counter her. And really, I think that I want to put this character on the list because many people believe that Widowmaker isn't worth learning, and still, reliably, Widowmaker is like the one character that if you're in a relatively higher rank, that's the character that you're most afraid of taking over a lobby, because that's what a Widowmaker can do. She can create value from the neutral, as in, doesn't need an ultimate, doesn't need an ability, can create replicatable value that is purely tied to your mechanical skill. And I think at the very least, if you're not a Widowmaker player, you should have a plan to deal with Widowmaker, because there are going to be games you run into, especially as you start to climb, that a good Widowmaker feels completely oppressive, right? And if you can't Widow mirror, then you need a Widow counter, and yeah, it's going to be that severe because this character can literally take over a game like no one else. Now, if I were to give you one tip to start learning Widowmaker and become that much better, keep in mind that especially when you are trying to take your initial shot from an off angle or from a perch, and this goes double if they don't know where you are, you should be standing still for that initial shot. And the reason is when you're ADing left, right on your controller, crouch spamming, whatever, it makes it way harder to hit that first shot. You want to plant your feet and commit to a really high value shot instead of trying to make yourself really survivable when people aren't shooting at you, people don't even know you're there, or they're way outside of your effective range, so they're not a threat. You're much more of a threat, so maximize that accuracy by minimizing your movement in the window of you taking that shot. Now, number 5 on our list, we have Zen. And Zen is a character that a lot of people don't really know how to play or how to place in a meta because we all know how strong he can be, right? CC tied to his melee, the ability to really bully the enemy solo tank, can win duels by himself, but all of these strengths come with weaknesses, right? The glass cannon nature of this character where he can get deleted really, really easily. Sometimes if you don't hit your shots, you could just get bullied and double teamed on, or get farmed over and over again by a Tracer and a Sombra. So there are a lot of aspects of this character that feel like he's a liability to play. He doesn't have great mobility, actually no mobility. So sometimes you feel like you lag behind your team and you're going to get targeted a lot. And these are all true, but the strengths of Zen make up for it. And what you really need to learn about this character is how to position safely and appropriately. And this is the best way to explain it to you. If a Zen gets to consistently apply the discord and pressure to the enemy tank, you give your tank and your team a huge advantage because the enemy team can't take space aggressively, can't push in, can't make plays. And if they do, there's like a failure rate where they just make a mistake and just die, and you just win fights for free. So enemies are always going to try to deal with you, go for you, pressure you, but if you can make sure to keep track of the characters you're worried about and rotate relative to them, you kind of want to mirror their position, right? If they're flanking your left side, you want to wrap your right side, right? You're doing this to always put your team in between where the enemies that are threatening you and your position. Your team should always be in between them, and you can control that with your positioning, and you're giving yourself more time, right? As that Tracer's coming for you, you're giving yourself more time to ping, more time to damage, more time to scout, and you're also making it so there's higher pressure on that Tracer because you're still getting value existing back at your team. You're still healing your team, you're still discording, and the longer that Tracer takes, the more pressure is on them, and you want to put them in really awkward situations. So this is the idea, to constantly reposition, and make it so it's really, really hard for enemies to deal with you right away. You're consistently providing that value, and if you're a Zen that dies very little, you're a Zen that wins a lot. That's as simple as it is. This character is a character that if you have very little deaths, you're gonna win so many freaking games on this character. Now, the next character, number 6 on this list, it has to be Sigma. Sigma is just absurd and has been absurd for quite some time. I'm going to keep putting him on these lists until people keep locking this character, because we already know that he's pretty much a necessary character to play on Circuit Royale, on Havana, on Junkertown. These maps are needed for this character. He's just that good, but on many other maps, he's super, super strong, and you could bully so many characters, because the thing about Sigma, and we talked about this with Malga, it's a tank that gets value in the neutral, gets value just existing, doesn't have to make these crazy plays, doesn't have to keep pushing forward. You generate pressure, you generate damage, you don't die. And especially with Sigma doesn't need a lot of resources. He doesn't need a lot of healing. He doesn't need a lot of help. He can pretty much clutch fights by himself, apply a crazy amount of damage, and if you're just living, requiring little from your team, it gives your team so much freedom and flexibility to make plays and go for things without needing to coddle you or really have their attention on you that much. He's a very resource low tank that at the same time demands resources from the enemy team because of how much damage and pressure he outputs, and that's just crazy. And if you're a tank player that doesn't play any Sig at all, you're gonna give yourself a really hard time. And I'm not saying you have to main this character, I'm not saying you have to play him every single game, but I am saying, especially on the maps that are really good for him, especially on the points that are really good for him on those maps, it would be a good idea for you to learn Sigma, learn the tactics of Sigma. And if you don't want to play Sigma, at the very least learn how to counter Sigmas in those situations, even if it's not that easy. That's just how good Sigma is. He's that reliable, he's that strong. And if I were to give you one core tip on Sigma, I would make sure that you are properly learning how to route. And what I mean by that is, as a Sigma player, you don't want to fight enemies that are necessarily above you. You would ideally like to force enemies to fight on your playing field or go up to them and fight them on the high ground. So let's take Junkertown for an example. On the first point, you would like to climb up your stairs on attack, go and jump across so that you're on their high ground and fight them from their high ground. That's what you would like to do on Sigma until you get past that choke and you're in more open space, and then you can push the objective and fight around the objective, because you don't want enemies to be above you, ignoring your pressure and your damage and shoot down on your team. It's your job to flush them out. And then let's talk about later on, when we're on second point on that map, you're going underneath a bridge and the enemies have the high ground on you, but eventually you can force the enemy team down and you can force them in a bad position by putting pressure on the objective, allowing your team to play a little back, and you're going to be able to force enemies into the positions that you want to. So there's a lot of situations where Sigma either needs to challenge height or he needs to force low, and if you don't identify this as a Sigma, you're going to be losing games because you're not positioning well. You're going to think, hey, my teammates are failing me, my teammates are the reason we lost, but it's actually your fault and you don't even know it. And while it's pretty hard for me to break down everything to do with Sigma positioning, I do have a positioning guide on this channel you should definitely go check out. It's definitely great for understanding how to position well, and yeah, I would encourage it. But let's move on to number 7. We have Tracer. Of course, we got Tracer. Tracer is still the pound for pound most reliable DPS, strongest DPS, highest carry DPS in the game. Consistently able to pressure low targets, able to constantly trigger the DPS passive, can duel every squishy in the game, can pressure tanks from alternate angles, weird angles that they can't contest with. There's just so many things that Tracer can do, but the number one reason that Tracer will always be on top is something called actions per minute. Tracer just does more per minute than pretty much any other character. Consistently always finding value here, there, everywhere. A good Tracer feels like they have infinite blinks, and it's incredibly frustrating to deal with. But whether you're playing a brawl, a dive, or pretty much any composition, Tracer can be that character that really exploits weaknesses in a comp. And individually, you can outplay characters left and right. So just a phenomenal character in this meta and has been for quite some time. That DPS heal is also a great buff to Tracer, being able to stay out of a team fight and get healed without needing to route to health packs and things like that. But my number one tip for you, if you're trying to learn Tracer, and this is the one I give to people that want to pick up Tracer for the first time, you need to make sure that you are not using your blinks only to close in the gaps on enemies. You want to be routing around the map so that when you are on top of somebody, you have resources to fight them. And this is something that I see a lot in coaching. I've coached a ton of Tracers over the years, and I see Tracers do this all the time, where they see like someone maybe by themselves in the back line, and they'll double, triple blink over them. And here's the problem. You double, triple blink to an Ana, and you're going to get shot, you're going to get slept, you're going to get naded. And if you manage to dodge these things, you're still going to take damage, and you're probably going to have to recall. And then you're completely out of the fight, and that cannot happen to you. You need to position in a place that once you recall there, you're still close to the fight. You can get a blink back, and you can finish off a fight or finish off an enemy that's low after they use their cooldowns. And you want to have blinks to duel a target. You need to be able to deal a little bit of damage, blink, deal a little bit of damage, blink, dodge a cooldown, and this is how you actually confirm kills. So a lot of Tracers, it doesn't matter how mechanically good you are at shooting, if you don't even set up the engagements properly from the get-go, you're setting yourself up for failure, and way too many Tracers are doing that. So make sure you're doing this properly, and you're already better than so many Tracers in this game. But number 8 on the list, we have Moira. Now, this character is just really freaking strong, and it's especially strong in Brawl, and it's especially strong in Dive, because this character has great mobility, doesn't really die. If you position well and use your shift well, you're gonna die very infrequently, can actually duel targets, burst heal, create aggressive plays. There's a lot this character can do, and while her only true utility is damaging and healing, the fact that the mobility aspect of this character allows her to pivot on a dime, allows her to play extremely proactive at a moment's notice, means that small advantages can be flipped into huge advantages, and Moira can be the character that goes in with the Tracer, goes in with the Genji, goes in with the dive, and basically ensures that dive goes extremely well. Everything dies very quickly, and everyone gets to full very fast, right? You go in with the dive with your team, you heal orb your team, all all of a sudden they killed someone, they're back to full, you can go on the next target, and don't even get me started about Moira's ultimate. That is actually a fantastic aggressive tool at creating advantage in a dive or in a brawl. And yeah, this character is just really strong, really consistent. And honestly, if you play a character in your kit, like Zen, like Ana, characters that don't have great mobility, even like a BAP, you would do yourself a favor to add Moira to your hero pool, because this character can fit into so many different compositions, and you're going to be incredibly hard to target. You're going to be really, really good at creating these advantages, and yeah, I would definitely suggest it. But if I were to give you one tip on this character, I would say that a lot of new Moira players heavily overuse the damage orb. Healing orb is a way that's going to keep your teammates full, for one, but really rack up your ultimate very, very quickly. And most of the time, even if you're in a duel with an enemy, you would rather use a heal orb, like on the roof or on the wall, to heal yourself while you fight them, and use crouch spamming left and right while you're dealing damage to them, so that you're getting healed and they're dealing damage at a lower rate, which means they're just not going to kill you, and you're going to be able to kill them over time. You would think, I'm going to throw a damage orb at them, and then I'm going to deal damage to them, and they're going to do a lot of damage, but they could dodge the orb, or you're not going to be survivable enough for them to just kill you out of nowhere. And I would really say that the only time you're going to want to use damage orbs is either in the neutral, where you see opportunity, or when you can actually spam it down corridors, and specific examples that are going to guarantee you a kill or some value. But heal orb is the true superpower in the kit of Moira. Next character on the list, and number 9, is Diva. And Diva is actually receiving a buff as of this patch that makes her just a little bit better, but even in spite of the buff, that doesn't make this character all of a sudden amazing. This character has been amazing for quite some time, and a lot of people just don't really see the potential. And there's a lot of reasons why this character is really strong. Number 1, she's really good at just bullying a lot of DPS. Echoes, Faras, and just many hit scans. She can bully. If anyone's on an isolated off angle, there are few tanks in the game that can do something about it. But Diva can. Diva can directly do something about it, directly contest the high ground, directly contest this powerful angle. Diva can shut that down. In addition to that, Diva can shut down plays that would be game-winning plays. Whether that's a Tracer going in, whether that is, you know, any character trying to make an aggressive push, a far aggressive push, eat nades, eat sleeps, all of this, Diva can shut this down. And that's value that oftentimes goes overlooked. You're carrying silently from behind the scenes, but you are indeed carrying. And I really think the best part about Diva is that you can always take the fights and find the value where it is, but you can ignore the weaknesses where they are. So like everyone says, oh, Zarya is a problem with Diva. Well, if you play the high ground, you allow the Diva in, and then you collapse on her backline or find opportunities to shut down her off angles, then we can deal with the Zarya later. You don't have to fight her directly. And that's the thing. You don't have to fight things that you're disadvantaged against directly, because Diva has fantastic mobility. Diva can go low, take high, and do that on a dime. And that's one of the most powerful things you could do on a lot of maps, is you go to point on Diva, force congestion, and then fly and take that high ground. You force their tank to contest you on low, but you took high, but guess what? They cannot just randomly take high in the middle of the fight because they don't have the mobility you do. And now you're putting them in an awkward situation where they felt like they needed to contest you so that they didn't lose progress or whatever. But now they're at a disadvantage because they just gave up high ground to you. And that's things that those are little things you can force on Diva that's just crazy, crazy strong. If I were to give you a simple tip on Diva, I would probably make it about Diva Bomb. It's nice and exciting to potentially get like a 2, 3, 4-man Diva Bomb, but the reality of it is, Divas at the pro level or the high level, just use her ultimate to remech the vast majority of the time, like 95% of the time, because Diva without a mech is like half a character or less. Diva with the mech is incredibly powerful, so use it to get a second life. Don't try to play for this really high risk, high reward type thing. Instead, play for high reward, low risk, very reliable consistency with just using it to remech the majority of the time. Now, the last character on this list is a little bit of a speculation, to be honest with you, but I think he has a lot of potential, and he's been quite good for quite some time. It's Cassidy. And Cassidy did receive a couple of little nerfs, especially to his role and things like that, but notably, Cassidy doesn't have Hinder Grenade anymore. He has Flash again, where you can flash enemies, you're going to slow them, and they're not going to be able to crouch, and it's going to be pretty easy for you to follow up with that headshot. It's not going to be as easy as it was before. You're not going to be able to abuse tanks as much as you did before, where you could full stun it like you could in the previous game. In Overwatch 1 back in 6v6, where you could like flash over Rhine shields and stuff like that and like, you know, stun them, double headshot them, whatever. that would be completely broken with only one tank, first off. So I think it's a good exchange, and really, this is going to allow you to shut down a lot of squishies. Being able to slow them down dramatically is going to allow you to set up that headshot, and you're going to win a lot of fights. And I think just Cassidy is in a state where the hinder was very inconsistent and not that reliable, and this is going to be better than that a good percentage of the time, because you're going to be able to create reliable sources of value instead of value sources that you can't predict, you can't understand. And it combos better with his kit overall, because hinder was awkward in the fact that they would typically get away a little bit, turn the corner, then get stuck. Now you get to force that stick, force the burst damage right after it, and I think the combination of that together is going to make Cassidy just a bit better than he was before. He was already super survivable, and he still is, still rocking a crazy amount of HP, still more survivable with that role, even if it's not quite enough. I mean, that was just a crazy amount to the point we didn't really even need. And yeah, Cassidy's still great, still strong, and I do think that this change to the character is going to make him that much better to play, that much stronger. And I know personally I'm going to like him a lot more. So while this is a little bit of a gamble on this list, I do think that Cassidy is a great character to pick and play, and definitely a character you can climb to the highest ranks of play if you want to. But if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, definitely let us know in the comments down below. And please subscribe. Only 20% of you are subscribed. And if all of you subscribed, I would get to 100,000 subscribers today, and I would really appreciate it. But thank you so much for coming by. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.